question is simple. Does Grim Dawn have endgame? Yes, it does. This video contains spoilers. So you've reached level 100, you've beaten the campaign, and you're looking to go deeper into the game and start your loot hunt for unique items and recipes. Grim Dawn offers a wide range of ways in doing this. I will spend this video naming them in no specific order. First up, we have Skeleton Key Dungeons, or some like to call them roguelike dungeons. Currently as of patch 1.1.5, there are 5 of them in the game. They are Steps of Torment, Bastion of Chaos, Port Valbury, Ancient Grove, and the newest one added in the recent 1.1.5 patch, Tomb of the Heretic. These zones require a skeleton key to enter. Crafting skeleton keys is fairly simple, requiring a Blood of Chthon and some general components to craft. Once you enter though, it's best to be careful because when you die, there is no getting back until you reset the play session. Unless you're on hardcore, then you just die forever. These dungeons do have varying levels of difficulty, with Steps of Torment being the easiest and Tomb of the Heretic being one of the tougher ones. This level of difficulty will vary, of course, depending on your build, with some feeling a lot easier depending on the build you're using. Each dungeon offers roughly the same amount of legendaries per run. It's usually like 5-ish. You can check out my loot overview videos on my channel. I have one for each dungeon. I will leave links to those in the description below. But aside from random drops, they also offer unique or specific items, whether it be monster and frequents, specific to that dungeon, or just crafting material drops like Plume from Ancient Grove. I would also argue that they are great for recipe hunting. The final boss rooms have a good chance for dropping recipes. These dungeons have static layouts and are personally one of my favorite parts of the game. Next up, we have Nemesis Bosses. There are 11 of these in the game. Nemesis Bosses have loads of different spawn locations throughout the world and require a player to reach Nemesis status with that faction to see them. It was common for people to Nemesis hunt earlier in the days of the game for things like recipes and items, with the Cronley gang boss Fabius being a popular one because he was so easy to track down. I would also like to note that the previously mentioned Skeleton Key dungeons have spawn locations for some of the bosses within the dungeon itself. So doing a Skeleton Key dungeon and encountering a Nemesis boss is like a little bit of a bonus. After a Nemesis boss is dead, they have a chest near the encounter that you can go loot for a couple legendaries usually. The fights have unique mechanics sometimes. For example, a beast Nemesis Chupacabra likes to spawn healing pools and then split into smaller versions of himself. Others simply like to blow things up and ruin your evening. Third on our list is the Shattered Realm, or SR as some call it. I have a pretty good overview of this place on my channel. I will leave an annotation on the top right for the complete overview of this, but the Shattered Realm is a somewhat randomized endless dungeon similar to Rifting in Diablo 3, if you've ever played that. After you've delved 5 levels, you can respawn at the level with the crafted waystones. The deeper you go, the better the loot, generally speaking. I found that running Shattered Realm level 60-61 on normal yields some pretty damn good loot in and of itself, and it's much better because it can be done on normal, with many builds, and you don't need to sweat the resistance penalties as badly. Doing high-level Shattered Realm on Ultimate is almost more of a challenge, and a great way to test how powerful a build is. In patch 1.1.5, new waystones were added to allow players to spawn past level 75, but loot is disabled after level 80, so it essentially just becomes a challenge thing at this point, and not so much a loot thing. Most would agree that SR is one of the best ways to get loot quick in the game, but the delving and getting checkpoints can become a bit of a grind, so it's not for everyone. So next up, if SR isn't your thing, we have Crucible. Crucible is a Horde Mode DLC that was released after the base game came out to give players a way to endlessly farm items by taking on waves and waves of enemies and cashing in after the waves are cleared for a reward. This can be accessed at any point in the game. It's a totally separate feature from the main campaign and expansion parts of Grim Dawn. There are 3 difficulties for this place, 2 of which need to be unlocked by defeating waves of enemies in the previous difficulty. Then there are different levels within these difficulties, with the level 150 to 170 Gladiator clears being the most popular for loot and for build performance testing. You can use the tribute currency that is acquired during the clears at low car to spawn yourself at higher levels. This currency can also be used for buffs and turrets at the vendor that live within the room itself to help players progress through the waves easier. I have yet to do a deep loot dive into Crucible myself, as I was never a fan of timed Horde Mode game types. I have been told though that the loot from 150 to 170 Gladiators are similar to SR 75-76 clears, so you have some loot options in the endgame when it comes to maximizing loot per hour. And if you don't have this DLC, you aren't missing a large portion of the game. However, you'll be missing the opportunities to farm massive quantities of loot. I think it's cheap on Steam, so why not just own it anyway? Fifth on our list is Super Bosses and Secret Bosses. These are unique bosses, some requiring secret quests to access. These types of bosses are not really an endgame system per se, but they are a challenge for sure, and all these bosses have unique monster and frequents to offer, especially Lokar, who drops the experience increased leveling set, an absolute requirement for people wanting to continue making more characters. So if you've beaten the game, you should definitely check some of these out. There aren't many of these bosses or encounters in the game, maybe 6 or 7 that would fall under this category. And number 6 on our list, I just wanted to talk about other endgame options people might try out, and that is main campaign area farming. These are farming routes made by the community to maximize encounters and things like dynamite chests. Hero enemies will, of course, have a good chance to drop legendaries and epics on Ultimate, and places like the Arkovian Undercity and the Bug Hives in Act 2 are a great place for this. I'll leave a link to a couple videos below that have optimized farming routes like this. This style of farming is really good for a newer player that has gotten stuck, and they can usually be performed before even reaching max level. It has also been hinted that in a future patch 1.1.6, we might be getting loot shrines, which will further add to this type of campaign farming. They are said to function similar to devotion shrines, but at the time of making this video, they have yet to be released. And finally, we have the most challenging and impossible to overcome endgame encounters that Grim Dawn has to offer, making alts. Once you get a taste of how deep the rabbit hole goes, you'll start making alts left and right, and before you know it, you might not even know where you are anymore, and you might wake up somewhere else.